everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Two World Podcast. I have the honor to lead things off today, and I am Barney, and of course I am joined here with my co-host. He is
Jacob.
Yeah, and today we are very happy to have another episode featuring a guest visiting us today, and our guest today is.
My name's Shawn Hilliard.
Yeah, and I really don't know what to expect from today's episode. And Jacob told me that Shawn would be our guest today and some of the things that he would talk about. And a few thoughts came to my mind. The first thought, of course, it's a little bit out there, but given the nature of our podcast, my thoughts went to my favorite TV show, Northern Exposure. And the one DJ talks about Zen and the art of motorcycle maintenance. And in an episode, he's talking about car maintenance and teaching someone how to drive and saying how he realized that in the case of this author, that if Buddha can be comfortable, within the confines of an engine or within the workings of an engine, then he can be found anywhere. And as our podcast is about faith, I'm very excited to see how we can take a topic such as Volkswagens and maybe repairing cars and restoring cars and see how we can connect that with faith in our context. A second thought that came to mind today is my family has a little bit of a connection with Volkswagens as well. I don't know how many times I've heard the story of this beloved yellow VW Beetle that my parents had for the longest time. And I never had the chance to ride in it, but they talk about it so fondly. And even connecting back to our very first episode, when I was in Thailand, I had the chance to drive a Volkswagen Beetle as well, a very old one that my host family had restored. And it was so nice to have that experience. And my experience with VWs is very, very small and limited. And so, but they are such an interesting car in a number of ways. And I'm excited to really hear more about today. And so, Shawn, could you just tell us, how did you get interested in this hobby or this passion of yours?
Yeah, I mean, wow. It just like faith, right? Like, do I think like I didn't have a conversion experience or a moment that I can point to where I chose and said, it's going to be, my interest is going to be vintage Volkswagens, right? It was just in the water, like it just was in the water all around me, right? My dad is a car dealer in Pennsylvania, and his dad started working at a Ford dealership when he was 16 or 18 years old. He went in and started washing cars, and eventually he worked his way up to being a salesman, and then he worked his way up to being a partner, and him and another partner bought the franchise. Ford closed the store, and they continued on with the name and moved the building to another part of town and became their own independent used car dealership franchise. And so, I mean, growing up all the time, was the exciting thing to do, if we could get time with Dad, it was at the store, right? I mean, he lived and breathed the stuff 80 hours a week. And so, you know, when it was dinner time, we'd hop in the car and take Dad a plate of whatever dinner was. We'd go down to the store. It was a quarter of a mile from where we lived, and we'd go down there and, you know, run circles around in the showroom and, you know, end up out in the mechanics bays where we weren't supposed to be. And, you know, so cars were just you know, as I was preparing for this morning, for this episode, I was just thinking about how, man, either you're a car person or you're not. And it's just like, and again, I didn't choose, I don't remember choosing it. I think it's kind of it can be a frivolous thing. It's kind of a silly thing, right? But man, it's in my blood. I don't know why, I don't know how. It's funny, you reference Persig and Zen in the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Like, how does this stuff get in? How does it get down into the machine, like into the machinery, and your connection to the machine and all? Like, man, I love that book. You know, I don't know. So yeah, but really the Volkswagen part of the story is a connection to my mom's brother, my uncle. His name was Tim, and he was an artist and kind of in some ways he was a bit of a recluse. But he was a fascinating person, had grown up in that early 60s, like he came of age in the early 60s in that hippie movement. I don't know that I'd necessarily say he was a hippie, but certainly independent thinker. You know, he was, yeah. I mean, it again kind of grew up in the water of that countercultural movement, and in sometime in the early 70s, he went out on his own, moved from Pennsylvania to California, landed in California, knew no one, didn't have a job, had driven a van across country, and just wanted to see if he could make it on his own in this place that he had heard of as a kind of a land of opportunity. You know, and what LA was like in that time and that place was, you know, in some ways still the Wild West of just booming opportunities. And he took a job as a sign painter's apprentice, and got into sign craft, hand lettering, taking a paintbrush and going out, painting, you know, for sale signs or realty signs or whatever it was, and just went to work every day painting signs. And then he would explore on the side, he would explore his art, and had become part of an art community in Laguna Beach. And the way he always told the story was he was just looking for transportation that he could, you know, just reliably use to move pieces of art. And that's how he got into the Volkswagen buses. Primarily, he could take a big sign or a big hunk of wood, take it home, you know, letter it, paint it, sell it to a client, and make what was good money, you know, $200 and $300 for a sign, which, you know, in today's world doesn't seem like much, but in the late 70s and early 80s, that was good money, you know, for a couple hours of work on a Saturday or whatever. And that's really what he did. And I think that that sort of built the foundation for him around the Volkswagens. And then he would travel home every fall, back to his roots, back to the beginning of his story, which was Western Pennsylvania. And he would primarily visit with my mom. Of that sibling group, I think he had a pretty strong connection with my mom, and enjoyed spending time with us as kids. I have some fond memories of him showing, I didn't know he was coming. He'd just show up at the door, knock on the door, and have 2 large pizzas in his hand. And it was all of a sudden it was pizza night, and yeah, I can remember he'd come home in the fall, and he'd often, he got into the habit of going out into rural junkyards and searching for parts, searching for old Volkswagens. He had kind of connected to the Volkswagen community in California and realized that there was value in the little parts and pieces that made up the vehicles. And so I think, he'd come home on his vacations, and, he'd burn some time. He'd hop in a car and he'd drive out into the rural parts of Western Pennsylvania, find an old country junkyard that had a bus or a bug or whatever, and he'd pull the door handle off of it. He'd pay $1 for it in the junkyard, throw it in his suitcase, take it back to California. And again, in his spare time on the weekends, he'd go to a Volkswagen show and he'd sell it for $20. And he thought that was really neat, that he could take something that had been kind of discarded and thrown away on one side of the country and take it to the other side of the country and make 20-fold on it, which, and he would often talk about that it was an economy of scale. Right. It was an economy that he could understand. He was never one for kind of trusting fully in capitalism. And so, or he had a lot of questions about capitalism, right, from his countercultural roots, his growing up in that movement. And so when it came time to saving money for retirement, he did that, but he didn't understand the stock market. He didn't understand how mutual funds worked and how investments worked. And in a lot of ways, he wouldn't have trusted it even if he could have understood it. But he did understand and could see the economy of scale around this Volkswagen stuff. Long story short, I keep saying that, but at 13 and 14 years old, I was just coming into my own, and to have my older uncle, who was cool, who was hip, who was awesome because he lived in a beautiful place like California, and he'd bring me sneakers or a t-shirt from Laguna Beach or something like that. And real quick, he invited me to come with him on these adventures into the wild unknown of a junkyard. Jacob has a picture, this first picture of me. This is one of my adventures at, I'm probably 14 or 15 years old in this picture. We found this bus. It had been sitting in a guy's yard and down near a floodplain, and the water had risen and had tipped the bus over on its side. And Uncle Tim sent me in there to see what parts I could find. I crawled up the chassis side of it into the bus, and this is me. He snapped my picture, kind of coming up out of this bus. And so this was my dream of a good time at 15 years old, right? If it was fall and my uncle came home and I could skip school for the day and go out into the junkyards, and help him pull parts off of old cars. So
It's interesting that your uncle maybe was his first draw was through the buses, because I kind of maybe my image is that era is kind of epitomized by the VW bus.
right.
It's kind of such a hallmark of when I don't know, of like Americana, something that comes to everyone's mind, and it's also so fantastic thinking of I wonder if maybe even more than the economic impact or result that he saw from taking something from the junkyard and selling it. Maybe it was just kind of this sense of the rebirth of making something new again from something that was old and forgotten. Maybe that was that something? Did you get a sense that maybe that was even more of his motivation, or what he really found the joy? One thing that he found joy was the source of joy in this hobby of his.
Sure. Yeah. Taking something from nothing, maybe, would be kind of the terminology you might use. I mean, I think he so his parents would have been kind of from that Great Depression. Like they would have grown up in their households as children, been exposed to some of that kind of frugality, right? And so he learned that, he loved that. He had this thing where he would always be searching for coins on the ground. I had this whole system of, when you stop at a gas station, here's where the money will likely be. Here's where you'll likely find a dime or a nickel or a penny. You'll find it, on the far side of the parking lot. If there's a slope one way or the other, right? Because the water will wash the coins down to the far slope. And so to this day, when I pull into a gas station, I have this kind of narrative running through my head with him. There's what we call red zones, where there's a high percentage of chance that you're going to find coinage laying on the ground, right? Right up there near the register where money changes hands. Just drop your eyes down, and you'll almost always see a nickel or a dime laying there. And he would collect this. I have probably 25 glass jars full of the money that he found over his lifetime. So he would find it. He had I don't remember if it was his left pocket or his right pocket, but he had his money in one pocket, and then the found money always went in the other pocket. And at the end of the day, he'd take the found money and he'd put it in one jar, and he'd put his change in the other jar. And so, yes, it's about money, but it really was about something for nothing, or making something out of nothing. And that there was that circle, or that cycle of, again, economies of scale, taking something that he understood that had value, that had been discarded, and could be repurposed or reused. Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think it was also a lot of the ways that these parts would be found were by connecting with other collectors, right? So, because really by the 90s, kind of the first wave guys who had been collecting in the 70s, they had kind of moved up in the pecking order of collector status. And so this is a whole nother topic that I've gone into with Jacob in the past, but there's kind of a whole community of practice built around this Volkswagen culture, right? This collector, as is the case in any collector culture, right? And so he would, I think he also really enjoyed the genuine connection of doing business with a handshake, right? Like to have, because there were junkyards that had lots of like strictly just Volkswagen junkyards, and in order to tap that resource for all that it was worth, in his mind, you really had to have a kind of a relationship with the person who was the owner of the yard, or the owner of the, you'd find again, it's kind of rural culture, but you'd find somebody who had 3 or 4 buses just lined up out in the backyard, that were just going into the ground. And so he'd want to have a way of doing business with them so that he could return next fall and buy more parts, or had a whole process for, when Volkswagen people in this collector culture, this collector community, would often know each other. And so, the first thing you would do when you found somebody is you'd ask them who else in their area did they know who had Volkswagen stuff. Volkswagens were unique for a long time in that they had 6-volt electrical systems instead of 12-volt electrical systems, which were more common. And so one of our strategies was we'd go into a local Napa or a local auto parts store, and we'd ask the guys at the counter if they knew of any Volkswagen guys, because Volkswagen guys were always coming in and buying 6-volt batteries. And so those people would stick out in the mind of a guy working behind a parts counter, because he'd have to order a special 6-volt battery for the car, versus every other car guy who came in who needed a battery every 2 years or whatever, they'd be buying 12-volt batteries, but the Volkswagen guys would usually be buying 6-volt batteries. And so that guy would stick out in the mind of a counter employee. And so we'd go in and we'd ask them, like, hey, who are the Volkswagen guys in the neighborhood? And they'd always know, so we had all kinds of theories about, where these things would live, right? Like you said, these the buses specifically were built around the countercultural movement, and so a lot of time, like, we'd always hit college towns, right? Go to like State College, or go to the little Edinburghs, or whatever the college town was in Western Pennsylvania. We'd try and roll in there and hit the auto parts stores in those towns, believing that, okay, college kids would have brought these things. They'd have brought them out of New York City, headed to California or headed to Chicago or wherever. And maybe they stopped to connect with some friends at a college party or whatever, and go out the next morning and the bus wouldn't run. And so it would end up in a junkyard, or end up for sale or for trade into a collection of, somebody who was servicing and maintaining them. And so, just kind of using that understanding of the way communities work, ultimately to drive our connection to the vehicles.
Shawn, one of my favorite memories of hearing about Volkswagens, and I'll just let our audience know that both Shawn and I serve as pastors in the same conference. And so it's Ohio Mennonite Conference. And so every so often over the years we've driven together to events. And one particular year, I think we were driving to Central Mennonite Church. I think that's the one where I'm thinking of. And you drove, and that's located in Archbold. And along the way, you talked about your experience with Volkswagens. And there were 2 parts of that story that were so interesting to me. One is about the unique aspects of the vehicles that display or reveal certain unique things about when they were made. And you told me this one story about the headlights and how certain older models in the actual space of the cavity of the headlight, you can still see, I don't know if it was a grease pencil or you'd see marks that were residue that were left over from the factory when the workers had written certain things in there. And that would display, it would give you a hint about, the age of the vehicle that was there. And then you also talked too about how Volkswagens kind of had I don't know if you want to say a renaissance or had a great popularity in Brazil, a wave of popularity in Brazil after maybe that the initial run of Volkswagens in Germany. And so you can sometimes find a lot of Brazilian models for sale that maybe are a little bit more affordable, but they have somewhat subtle differences with the earlier models. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the minutia, some of those interesting pieces that give you hints about, this or that aspect of the vehicle.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, as much as you want to geek out on that stuff. Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of that goes back to and there's been a lot of ink spilled about this topic. If you really want to take the deep dive, but so the way Volkswagens were designed, because of the time and that post-war Germany and just so many things led to the actual way that the vehicle is designed. And it was designed really to be brutally simplistic, right? And I think that's why it has survived for so long. And I think my gut is that this is why it will survive for a long time yet to come, right? There's something about humans and tools, right? There's a whole world about this, right? But look, if this computer breaks, I have to throw it away, right? It just becomes that it's I don't have screwdrivers small enough to open the case of my MacBook Pro, right? If the screen cracks, I can't repair it. Someone can, right? But it usually seems to be becoming more and more the case that we've moved to just disposable, planned obsolescence, right? I mean, there's a whole world out there of, look, you throw it away and you go buy a new one, right? But in the story of the Volkswagen, the air-cooled Volkswagen specifically, that just wasn't the case, right? It wasn't built for a time and a people where there was just infinite resource and infinite availability. So you had to be able to, because you needed this thing to take you from point A to point B reliably, consistently, it had to be able to be serviced by the owner, right? The owner's manuals themselves include lists of and facts about how the car is to be serviced and maintained, right? It's not full of warnings about the airbags and how to strap the children in correctly. It's full of here's how you adjust the valves. Here's how you service the steering gear. Here's how you service and grease the link pins and all that stuff. And so the car just comes from a different time, and it was produced for a very, very long time, largely the same way, right? And so when production stopped in Germany in the late 70s, Volkswagen actually shipped much of the the tooling, the large dies, all the things to stamp out all the parts. They shipped all that stuff to Brazil, and they basically set up shop in Brazil to continue production of the Beetle and the transporter. And so I think it's up into the 90s somewhere, another 25 years where they were still, largely produced, massively produced, largely in the same way they had been since the 30s, right, and the 40s. And so again, what that has done is it's created the ability to have parts for Volkswagens, the wearable parts, a door from a 90s Beetle produced in Brazil or Mexico won't fit your early 50s Beetle. The door isn't the same, but you could pull the motor out and it would bolt right into a 50s or 60s Beetle, right? The structure is largely the same. The mechanical part is largely the same. What I was talking about with the grease pencil stuff, that's like, 8th and 9th level geekdom, really. As the cars would come down the assembly line, they wouldn't have the headlights in them yet, and they'd come right out of paint, and there'd be an employee who would write the color code in grease pencil. So L85 is dove blue, or L63 is pearl white, or whatever it was, right? And they'd write that L85 inside the headlight bucket, then they'd put the headlight in. And what would happen is, even if a car was restored, if it was painted quickly by a restorer, maybe they'd pull the headlight out and they'd spray paint. They'd spray them, they wanted to paint it purple or pink or whatever. They'd spray it, then they'd put the headlight back in, because there's only one screw that holds the headlight in. It takes 30 seconds to take it out. But a lot of times, even if you have a car that's been painted, you can pull that headlight out, and if you rub a little bit, you'll see where the new paint, the second paint color, wouldn't stick to the grease pencil. And so if you just rub around a little bit inside the headlight bucket, a lot of times it'll come off, and you'll be able to see L85 dove blue, or whatever the original paint color was. So that's just kind of when you are around the stuff forever, you figure that out.
I love that. I love that example, because if you really are attentive and you're passionate, you're drawn to a deep knowledge of whatever it is that you're invested in this case with Volkswagens. And so these small aspects of how the vehicles were made or produced, they inform your experience, and you can find out things that would on the surface level seem impossible. Like, somebody might assume, oh, I can never know what the original color of this vehicle was. Well, if you know that trick and those conditions are right, you can. And it's a wonderful example of when you really learn something deeply, it can unlock additional, knowledge or information that most people couldn't typically access.
Yeah, when they came down the production line, the actual wheel, the metal rim part of the wheel, is actually date stamped. It has they stamped it with a die that had the month and the year of that wheel's production. And so when your car left the factory, when a 1963 Volkswagen Deluxe bus rolled off the factory line, it had 5 rims, right? Four for each wheel, and then the one spare, and they were all dated the same, right? They were dated 2 of 63, or 5 of 63, or 10 of 63, right? Well, a lot of times, someone would pull the spare out of one and use it on another one, or you had a flat tire and again, just for ease of use, you could, walk into town and have, another wheel and tire there and just bolt the whole thing on. And so a lot of times, or if you're in a restoration setting, I need these wheels for this, and they go on that, the wheels get mixed up, and all of a sudden you don't have the 5 original wheels, the wheels that the car actually left the factory with. And so when you get into a high level restoration, guys will chase wheels that are correctly stamped for their car, right? They want that level of authenticity and originality. And so, I have a stack of wheels out in the garage, and the first thing I do is I take a wire brush and scrape the paint off and try and figure out what the date code is on that wheel. And if I'm going to list that wheel for resale to a collector, part of my advertisement for that wheel is, this is an 8 of 63 bus wheel, or this is a 10 of 63 bug wheel, so that a buyer can say, oh yeah, I'm looking for that level of detail.
As we're having our conversation, I kind of realize how much kind of mystique there is, and I get a sense of a combination of art and also of science, in a way of being like a detective, like you seeing all these clues and, kind of getting a sense, a notion of where you can find, these parts, like you were talking about, what is it that let's try to reconstruct what brought this bus to this college town, something like that. And I guess to kind of re-emphasize a little emphasis for maybe some of our listeners, bugs were not made for a really long time. They were inaccessible for quite a while. I remember my parents lamenting, oh, we loved that car, but we could never get one. And they said, kind of referencing last week's episode, should we go to Brazil and get one? My dad spent time in Brazil, but, and then they came back. And even one of our neighbors here has one. And my youngest son is 2 in a few months. And he always says, Beetle car. He loves to go see this Beetle car. And another friend of mine, we saw a Beetle parked, a new one. And he said, look at the front. What do you notice? And what does it make you think of? And I said, I don't know. And he said, it's a Porsche. The headlights and the design of the front is like a Porsche. With bringing the Beetle back, especially, is some of the mystique lost, or is that just a separate thing? Is that the new Beetle thing, and in many people's hearts, this searching for these things and the old Beetles and the old buses, is that kind of like where it is? It doesn't matter that they brought back that they're producing it again, but that you can never replace kind of the original. Is there some sense of that, or is there equal excitement for having the Beatles back on the road again with that fantastic flower vase on the dashboard? Or how did you feel, especially when you heard they were going to produce them again?
I mean, I had mixed emotions, right? Maybe it'd be best to look through the lens of my uncle, though, right? He was actually really excited about the new Beetle when it launched. It launched in 1999. Volkswagen relaunched the Beetle, and I can remember all the excitement. Volkswagen tried to stir that excitement. They tried to, benefit from it. So as a collector, he had collected and knew that some of the earliest promotional material, the toys and literature, the posters, the paraphernalia, I mean, there's still some of that stuff floating around from the 30s and 40s and 50s in Germany, right? I mean, I can take you down into my basement and start opening boxes full of literature from, the earliest of bugs and buses, and when they started doing the camper vans, they had sales literature and little promotional items, and I have a whole box full of pins and buttons, and just little, and there's great value in one of the other things that Volkswagen really pioneered was they did some incredible advertising in the 60s. Their marketing team is studied in textbooks for marketing today because of some of the strategies that they used. Right, they were very innovative in trying to sell this old design, poorly designed car to consumers, right? And they did it. They did it, and they hit it out of the park. And so he got into it. He started collecting, little plastic models of the new Beetle. He would go into the dealerships in 97 and 98 and 99 and say, tell me about the new Beetle, and see if they would hand him a sales brochure or an accessories brochure, and he bought one. He eventually in the late 2000s, he had bought a new Beetle. They made a turbo edition that had special wheels and special tires and a spoiler and some of that stuff. And so he went and found the nicest one he could find, and bought it and drove it. My experience was a little bit different. I had some of the water-cooled Beetles in high school, or water-cooled Volkswagens in high school, because I couldn't afford, and I couldn't, living in Western Pennsylvania, you can't actually drive an air-cooled Volkswagen 12 months out of the year. It can't really be a daily driver for you, right? Because it doesn't have any heat. It doesn't, it can't go far. It breaks down, for a high school kid, it just wasn't feasible to say, oh yeah, a 66 Bug is going to be, it was my first car. I owned one at 13. I went out and found an old junk Bug and bought it with the intent that I was going to restore it and drive it. But it was ultimately an 86 Golf that was my first car, right? Because it could actually take me to school. It had heat. It was reliable, somewhat reliable. But I just had the Volkswagen today is not Volkswagen of the 60s, right? I love them, but I drive a Toyota every day, right? My day, I have a barn full of vintage Volkswagens, and when it comes time to put the kids in the car and go to school, we get in my Toyota, right? Because Toyota can get it done. Volkswagen has lost me as I wouldn't walk onto the Volkswagen dealership today and think I was going to buy a new car, right? It's just not there. And I think that's what a lot of the enthusiasts would tell you. As much as Volkswagen tried to save the soul of the Beetle and put it into the new car, that's been the story. There was a whole movement that car came out of, that retro movement, the PT Cruiser, and all of those kind of trying to tap into the nostalgia. Again, some of that is the economic forces, right? The boomer generation who drove the Beetle when they were kids. Now they had money to walk into a dealership and buy a new car. And so maybe they were buying a second car or a third car, and you could put a new Beetle in front of them and, oh, it's cute. The top goes down or whatever. And it kind of stirs up a little bit of that nostalgia, but it just was never going to be, for the purists like me, it was never going to check all the boxes. And so and in fact, they don't make them today. The last of they did a refresh or a redesign in 2014 or 2013, something like that. I think by 2018, the Beetle line has been discontinued. So as of this moment, Volkswagen does not make a Beetle. My gut is you'll probably see it again. You'll see it make another appearance. They've floated that with some of their electric stuff. One of the new electric things that they're building kind of looks like a bus a little bit, and they took some pictures with an old bus next to it, and did some of that. So can I walk you guys through the rest of these pictures with
Yes.
like the last 5 minutes or whatever? Maybe that's not
Yes.
cool on a podcast, but
Yeah,
I
no,
sent
it's
these pictures, and
100%.
I kind of have a little bit of a story that I wanted to tell.
Yes.
So this picture, this is him. This is my uncle. This is one of our last trips into a junkyard. This is a yard we'd been to 100 times. And he kind of has this goofy smile on his face because he's carrying the tool bag. So we had this bag that we put all the tools that we would need to pull parts off of cars. So wrenches and hammers and chisels and screwdrivers and WD-40 and everything that we thought we'd need. And the kind of the running joke was that as a kid, I always had to carry the tool bag. And so we got out of the car this day, and I had him grab the tool bag, and he started down the little lane there. You can see it. And I said, "Hey, Tim, turn around. Let me take your picture because you're carrying the tool bag for the first time." And so he has this goofy look on his face because I had caught him. The jig was up. In some sense. So, but that's my uncle. That's, I would say that's in his natural habitat. He's really happy there in that moment. So let me show you the next one here. So this is his fleet. It's now my fleet. Tim passed away in August of 2020, kind of unexpectedly. At the age of 70, and he left me the fleet, all of these vehicles. So this was his daily driver, this panel bus. He had guessed he probably had put like 200,000 or 300,000 miles on this van, just driving it every day back and forth to the sign shop. Show you the next one. This is a 1967 Sundial camper conversion. This bus was the last bus that he had found and bought. He went through it mechanically and had the bumpers painted and cleaned up a little bit, but it is in its natural state. This bus has never been cut or welded on. It's never been painted. You can see the original velvet green paint there just kind of melting off in the California sun. And it's kind of beautiful in its own way. This is really where the hobby is going now, to this kind of unadulterated place, this place that says, I am what I am. And the beauty is in the, nobody's ever painted this bus. No one's ever kind of messed with it. It's just purely in its natural state. You can tell that it was in some ways abused over its life, and in some ways it was cared for. This bus is 50, 60 years old at this point. So next. This is a Bug that he bought, again, kind of in that same vein of original paint, just sort of melting off in the sun. The vehicles that he owned, having lived most of their lives in California, were in really good condition. And this was just one that he had purchased and built up just kind of as a change of pace car, fun little car to drive around. The surfboard you see on the top isn't a surfboard that he ever rode, but he had he had made an advertisement for a fictitious Volkswagen dealership. And so the top of the surfboard, you can't see it, but it's been painted, lettered up for Surfside Motors with a VW logo on it. So this was a car that was just for fun. Next one. This is the pride and joy of the fleet. This is a very unique vehicle. This is a 1966 Volkswagen double cab pickup truck. You can see the rear gates there would fold down, and it has room for, it was sold to seat 6 people. Can you imagine piling 6 people in there? All the advertisement was 6 people plus cargo. So if you were a small business owner, you had maybe a tree service or I don't know, a plumbing crew or something like that, you would buy this. You could take your crew with you and haul something, not a lot of weight. It would have only had about a 53 horsepower motor. But they were geared in such a way to be able to move a heavy load, not at fast speed, but again, to go from A to B. This truck is just in absolutely immaculate condition. He bought it largely just as it sits, hasn't really been horsed around with all that much. You can see it's been two-toned. Somebody painted it. It wouldn't have been gray and white. It was just white originally from the factory, but it does have all 5 of its correctly date stamped wheels. And he bought it because he liked the look of it. He would use it to haul art projects in, but largely it was just a Sunday driver. Every time I would go visit him, he'd take it out of storage. It was stored in that garage there at a friend's house, and he'd hand me the keys of his most prized possession and let me drive it to the show. And I think that was just one of the ways in which he told me that he loved me, was to, I can remember one of my earliest memories of driving a bus was in this bus that I knew meant the world to him. And it had been serviced down at the technician who worked on his stuff for him down in Dana Point. And we were bringing it back to Orange County, and we took the panel bus down together, picked this up, and he asked me to drive this one home, and he drove the panel bus, and I was following him down the freeway. I would have been probably 17, 18 years old. Had never been behind the wheel of one of these things before. I knew that it was incredibly valuable. It's probably in today's market, it's probably a $75,000 bus, something like that. And it had sat at the shop and had just dust all over the front windshields. And we were driving right into the sun, and I just couldn't see, for the life of me, I couldn't see out of the front windshields to follow him up the freeway. But you can see that the front windshields are actually Safaris, and they kind of fold up or tip out. So I was able to tip them out just enough to be able to get a couple of inches of visibility down along the bottom of it as I was driving, trying to follow him. I had, didn't know where I was going. I'd never driven in LA traffic before. I don't know if that's a good story or a bad story, but it was one of my first memories of driving a split window bus. They are a unique driving experience for sure, not for the faint of heart. They say when you drive a Volkswagen bus, you're always safe because you're the first one to the scene of an accident, because you sit right out over the front wheels there. So next one. This is a car I built kind of in the style of my uncle. This car I found here in Ohio. It had lived its life in North Dakota, and I just put it back on the road. I don't own it any longer after inheriting his fleet. I just didn't have room for it. So a friend has it. It's still in the area, but it was a car that I had found and rescued and rebuilt all the mechanicals on from kind of the top down. Next, this is my bus. I found and bought this bus a few years ago. I was just about ready. I've only ever had it. I've owned it for probably 5 years now. I've only ever had it out on the road 2 times. And the first time that I ever really drove it anywhere, I actually got to ride with my uncle in it. He was home kind of for one of his last trips, what would become one of his last trips back here. And he helped me bleed the brakes on it. And then we drove it from here in Orville to Worcester together. So I'll eventually finish that project and have it as part of the collection, but it was kind of really sweet to have had my first ride in my bus be with him. So
Shawn, before we go on, I just want to mention to Barney, when you talk about the collection, when your uncle bequeathed these to you, I was really impressed with the lengths that you went to create a space to keep them dry and safe and well cared for. And so, Barney, Shawn actually built like a large garage right next to his house where all of these cherished vehicles from his uncle are kept. And you go in and there's it's just a wonderful open space. There's plenty of room and to take care of the vehicles and keep them dry and cared for. And so I just thought that's an interesting part of the story, that you inherited these things, but then you also made arrangements to keep them well and cared for.
Yeah. That kind of I guess that brings the story full circle. You had asked the question, Jacob, about oftentimes good things are better when shared. Can you talk a little bit about how you've been able to share your enjoyment of Volkswagens? I kind of feel like that's the mission. Maybe this picture begins to sum that up. This is Tim just a few weeks before he passed away. We hopped in. This is in the camper bus, in the Sundial camper bus, and we went to his favorite. One of his favorite stops was this bakery in Newport Beach, and they made these eclairs that reminded him of the ones my grandmother used to make. And so we would always. It was a big deal. It was quite the production to go get these eclairs, and then we'd take them from the bakery down to the coast, down to the beach, and we'd sit in the bus, front row, right at the beach, watch everybody surfing and hanging out at Newport Beach in the morning, and we'd eat our eclairs together. Go ahead and show the next couple of slides, Jacob. This is my son eating his eclair on his first birthday. Not one from Newport Beach. This is back here in Ohio. But this was our tradition with our kids on their first birthday. Instead of giving them cake, my wife would make the eclair recipe that was my grandmother's, and we would give them to the kids. So I don't know if that's good parenting or bad parenting. That's a lot of sugar for a 1-year-old. Go ahead in the next one, Jacob. This is my daughter Samantha eating her birthday eclair on Jude's first birthday. And the next one is Elizabeth eating, stuffing her face with an eclair. And yeah, so this is, I guess to try and make a cohesive thought out of this, right? Trying to pass on this legacy, and to my my daughters at least will remember meeting Uncle Tim. They'll remember hanging out with him a little bit. But trying to share with them, right? I think that's the big challenge for me right now. I have now the Volkswagen collection of my dreams, but it can also feel a little bit like a nightmare because there isn't a time that I don't get in one and don't think of him. I'm not reminded of who he was and the massive investment that he made in who I am today, right? And so, and it's hard. I'll hop in the double cab and I'll go to a show on a nice Saturday somewhere, and I'll do all the kind of things that I remember doing with my uncle, make all the stops, hit the gas stations, look for the coins, slow down, come out of my normal routine. When you're in an old Volkswagen bus, you're not going anywhere fast. So, it's all for fun. Right. And, but in a way it's haunting because he's not here to share it with me anymore. And so, there are moments where it feels way too heavy to be taking care of 5 vehicles and trying to carry on in this what is supposed to be fun and exciting, right? But it's a burden too, and it's best when it's shared. And so I've tried to build some community around it, to instill in my kids. My girls love to hop in the camper bus and go on an adventure, right? And Jude will too, I think, trying to parent them. Go ahead and show the next one. This is our last ride here, fittingly in his panel bus. This was about 20 days before he passed away. We got to ride together, just kind of for fun, just before the bus was put on the transport, bring it back here to Ohio. What do I have for the last one, Jacob? Yeah, that's us. So I guess, I don't know. I guess now I'm kind of in the driver's seat, and I'm anxious to share. I'm excited for the next chapter to think about how sharing some of this stuff, because it's way more fun to share it with somebody else. I think that's why he chose me, to give me all of the to let me tend the fleet, because he knew that I would probably do my best to continue to share,
Yeah. Shawn, I really feel like that's a moving story about love, and also about mutuality and mutual care and respect. Like,
yeah.
For him to have you drive that one bus when you were a teenager coming home was a sign of respect for you. And then for you to make it clear to him that you want to carry on this love and passion that he's given to you was a great sign of respect to him. And I love that your daughters and we expect also your son will continue to enjoy these vehicles. And it makes sense to me why it would feel heavy now, because you're still mourning the passing of your uncle, and it makes sense that it wouldn't feel the same. But I guess I hope that there will be new joy and discovery as you continue to take your kids out for drives and rides. And it's neat to hear too that there's a sense of community that you've been able to establish with some of your friends in the area who love Volkswagens too, which is very life-giving. And so before we close our time, I just wanted to give one more opportunity to Barney or to you, if there's any final thing you wanted to say before I close our time. This is a chance to do that.
I couldn't add anything more. It's just been such a fantastic time, and the the time has flown by so quickly, and just to learn all these things and to see your passion. And I'm just also just so touched by the way that you even are able to incorporate your grandmother's recipe. You know, this delight of these eclairs that somehow have this strong connection with your passion for these cars. And it just adds something so neat and wonderful to the story as well. And it's just been such a moving and fantastic time for me to join. I feel like I'm joining you guys today, and I'm just really honored to have heard your story, and I'm really thankful for that.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun to tell it. I really appreciate the platform to tell the story. I think it, for me, thinking about it from a I don't know, from a pastoral perspective, right? I mean, shared language, shared experience, like shared values, shared breaking bread to like those are the that's kind of the toolbox, right? Like in the same way that I don't get in one of these vehicles and go anywhere without my tools, right? What are the, maybe that's, I don't really know what you guys do on this podcast, but maybe that's what you're after, right? Like building a toolbox for people as they try to exist in this crazy world, right? And communities stories are, it's pretty complex, the way things come together, right? But all of those shared things, to have similar language, to have similar values, to have shared food, and all of those little parts. When I look at what I have received from my uncle, I think it's good. It's good news, right? Because it's a way of walking through the world with eyes open to being able to see the world from somebody else's perspective or somebody else's point of view. And so, isn't that the kind of what it's all about, right? Is to be able to be able to connect with each other. Well, break some bread together, eat somebody else's, sit at somebody else's table. But yeah, thanks for the platform for me to. Thank you, Jacob, for allowing me to geek out a little bit and pushing me to do so. It's been really fun to get to introduce this part of my story, part of my life, and share it with you guys. So I appreciate it. Appreciate the platform.
Thank you so much, Shawn. And it's been a real joy for us and very fulfilling and meaningful. And we also want to thank all of our viewers and listeners for tuning into this episode. We hope that you learn some important lessons today about what it means to pass on something that you're passionate about, maybe even take someone under your wing and share that passion. Or if you've received that from someone, to honor it and to enjoy it with those around you. And we hope that you have a great rest of the week. And until next time, goodbye.